The best part about watching my director lose her composure wasn't the money, although that $310,000 offer certainly made the moment sweeter. It wasn't even watching her try to explain to the executive board why 6 anchor clients terminated their contracts in under 2 months. The best part was the look on her face when she realized the files she dragged into the trash in front of 28 people hadn't actually destroyed anything that mattered. My name is Derek Callahan. I'm 52 years old, and 2 months ago, I stood in a conference room while someone tried to erase 14 months of the best work I've ever done. What she didn't know was that she was handing me the keys to everything I'd been too loyal to chase on my own. But I need to take you back to the beginning, because this story only makes sense when you see how every piece fell into place. About a year and a half ago, I accepted a position as Senior Fleet Optimization Consultant at Cornerstone Fleet Services, a mid-sized consulting firm that specialized in helping companies manage heavy equipment and vehicle fleets. I'd spent 27 years in the heavy equipment world before that. Started as a diesel mechanic fresh out of a vocational program in Michigan, eventually worked my way into fleet management, then operations consulting. I've had grease under my fingernails, diesel fuel on my boots, and calluses from turning wrenches on Caterpillar engines in January cold that would freeze your coffee before you could drink it. So when Cornerstone posted a job looking for someone who could help industrial clients squeeze more life and value out of their fleets, I figured it was a natural fit. What the job posting failed to mention was that Cornerstone was bleeding clients at an alarming rate. 3 consultants had cycled through the role in 2 years. The last one didn't even bother giving notice, just stopped showing up one Monday and never came back. I found out why pretty quickly. Victoria Marsh had been promoted to regional director about 8 months before I arrived. She came from a corporate strategy background, 10 years at a big consulting firm doing organizational restructuring, an MBA from a top 2.0 program, and an impressive talent for turning every conversation into a lecture about operational scalability. She had never, as far as I could tell, set foot inside a maintenance shop or spent 5 minutes talking to a mechanic about why a particular engine kept overheating. But she had very strong opinions about how fleet consulting should be delivered, and those opinions revolved entirely around standardized service packages, strict time allocations, and what she called repeatable consulting frameworks. Her philosophy was simple. Every client gets the same playbook, every project gets the same number of hours, and every solution comes from a pre-approved list of vendor partnerships Cornerstone had negotiated. Customization was a dirty word. Field visits were considered wasteful. If you couldn't diagnose a fleet problem from a spreadsheet and a phone call, you were doing it wrong. When I started reviewing client files during my first 2 weeks, I understood immediately why consultants kept quitting and clients kept leaving. The reports we were sending to companies managing millions of dollars in heavy equipment read like they'd been generated by a template. Generic maintenance schedules, off-the-shelf telematics recommendations, cost projections that had no connection to how these machines were actually being used in the field. It was consulting by algorithm, and the companies paying us $80,000 or $100,000 a year could smell it. One of our biggest accounts was Brannigan Mining Resources. Frank Brannigan ran a coal and aggregate operation across 3 sites in West Virginia and Kentucky. His fleet included haul trucks, front-end loaders, excavators, crushers, roughly $14 million in equipment that ran in some of the harshest conditions you can imagine. Dust, mud, 1-4-hour shifts, mountain roads that would shake a truck to pieces. Frank had been a Cornerstone client for a year and was openly talking about not renewing. During a routine quarterly call, Frank mentioned that his haul truck fleet was averaging 62% uptime, which is terrible for equipment that expensive. He'd been getting the same advice from us for months. Install telematics, follow the manufacturer maintenance schedule, replace units on a standard depreciation curve. None of it was working because none of it was designed for the kind of punishment his equipment was taking. I asked if I could visit his primary site and spend a few days looking at his operation firsthand. Victoria nearly came out of her chair. "We don't authorize site visits for standard fleet assessments," she said during our Monday planning meeting. "You can review the telematics data remotely and provide recommendations by Thursday." "Victoria, this man's running $14 million in equipment at 62% uptime. Whatever we've been recommending isn't working. I need to see what's actually happening on those haul roads." She stared at me for about 5 seconds. "Our service delivery model is designed for efficiency and scalability. If we send consultants to every client site, we'll never hit our billable hour targets." I went anyway. Took a personal day. drove 4 hours to Frank's main pit in West Virginia, and spent 3 days walking the site, talking to his mechanics, riding in haul trucks, and studying breakdown records that nobody at Cornerstone had ever bothered to request. What I found was exactly what I expected. The problems had nothing to do with the manufacturer's recommended maintenance intervals. Frank's haul trucks were running loaded on grades that exceeded 12%, in ambient temperatures that ranged from 15 degrees in January to 95 degrees in August, through conditions that turned roads into washboards after every rain. The manufacturer's maintenance schedule was designed for flat terrain and moderate climates. It was like giving a marathon runner the same training plan as someone who walks to work. The transmissions were overheating on the steep grades because the cooling systems weren't sized for continuous loaded climbing. The suspension components were wearing out 3 times faster than spec because the haul roads hadn't been graded properly in months. Frank's road crew had been cut during a budget reduction. Engine air filters were clogging in half the normal interval because of the dust levels at the crushing operations. I spent 2 weeks building a condition-based maintenance program tailored to Frank's actual operating environment. Transmission fluid changes based on operating temperature data instead of calendar dates. Suspension inspections tied to haul road condition assessments. Air filter replacement schedules linked to the crusher's production output, which directly correlated with dust generation. I also recommended he bring back his road grading crew and showed him the math. $45,000 a year for road maintenance would save him $380,000 in reduced tire wear, suspension repairs, and truck downtime. We implemented everything over 6 weeks. By the end of the first quarter, Frank's haul truck uptime had gone from 62% to 84%. That's enormous in mining. Every percentage point of uptime on a $2 million haul truck translates to real production revenue. Frank calculated the improvement was worth roughly $1.2 million annually in increased production capacity. He signed a 5-year contract extension at triple his previous rate, from $90,000 to $270,000 per year, and personally called 2 other mining operators to recommend us. When I presented the results to Victoria, I genuinely expected at least a nod of acknowledgement. Instead, she pulled up her project tracking spreadsheet. Derek, you logged 78 billable hours on the Brannigan account. Our fleet assessment protocol allocates 20 hours maximum. That's a 290% overage. I looked at her. Victoria, we just turned a client who was about to leave into a 5-year, $270,000 per year account, plus 2 referrals. She made a note in her tracking system without looking up. What concerns me is the precedent. If every consultant spent 78 hours on every account, our entire delivery model collapses. We need to maintain discipline around allocated hours. That's how we maintain profitability. That conversation should have been my warning. But I was still naive enough to think results would eventually speak louder than spreadsheets. The second big project came from Colleen Mercer, who ran Mercer Agricultural Equipment, a John Deere and Case dealership network with 5 locations spread across Iowa and southern Minnesota. Colleen's problem was different from Frank's, but just as urgent. Her service department was hemorrhaging money. Average repair turnaround time was 11 days during planting and harvest season, which is catastrophic for farmers who need their combines and tractors running. She was losing customers to a competitor dealership that had somehow cut their turnaround to 4 days. Standard Cornerstone advice would have been to recommend a new shop management software system, maybe suggest hiring more technicians, and file a 1-2-page report full of benchmarking data. That's what Victoria proposed during our team meeting. Mercer Agricultural is a textbook service efficiency case, she announced, clicking through her standardized presentation. We recommend our Tier 2 service optimization package. Implementation timeline, 3 weeks. Allocated hours, 24. But I'd already spent 2 hours on the phone with Colleen, and I knew the problem wasn't what it looked like on paper. Her technicians were experienced and skilled. She wasn't understaffed. Something else was causing the bottleneck. I drove out to her main location in Des Moines on a Saturday and spent the following week embedded in her service operation. What I discovered would have been invisible from a spreadsheet. The problem wasn't the technicians or the workflow. It was parts. Specifically, the way parts were ordered, received, and staged for repairs. When a combine came in for service, the diagnostic would happen within a day. The tech would identify what was needed, maybe a hydraulic pump, a set of bearings, some electrical components. Then the parts order would go to Colleen's parts department, who would check local inventory, find they didn't have everything, and place orders with multiple suppliers. Here's where it broke down. Each supplier had different shipping timelines, different order systems, and different minimum quantities. A $40 bearing might ship overnight, but the $2,800 hydraulic pump had a 7-day lead time from the regional distribution center. The technician couldn't start the repair until all parts arrived, because disassembling a $400,000 combine and letting it sit half apart in a bay while waiting for one component meant that bay was blocked and that tech was juggling another job. So the tech moved to a different repair, then had to context switch back when parts finally arrived, losing efficiency every time. I worked with Colleen's parts manager to build a predictive parts stocking system. We analyzed 3 years of service records to identify the 200 most commonly needed parts across their equipment lines, cross-referenced with seasonal demand patterns. Combines need different parts in August than they do in March. Planters have a completely different failure profile than grain carts. We pre-positioned critical parts inventory at each location based on the equipment population in that area's customer base. Then I restructured the repair staging process. Instead of first-come, first-served bay assignment, we implemented a triage system that matched repair complexity with parts availability. If all parts were in stock for a particular repair, that job jumped to the front of the line. Jobs waiting on parts got staged in a holding area with all available components pre-kitted so the tech could start immediately when the final piece arrived. Total implementation cost, about $65,000 in additional parts inventory and some warehouse reorganization. Results hit within the first month. Average repair turnaround dropped from 11 days to 3.5 days, beating the competitor Colleen had been losing customers to. Revenue in the service department increased 40% over the following quarter because they were cycling through more repairs with the same staff. Customer satisfaction scores went through the roof. Colleen upgraded her contract from $75,000 to $210,000 annually and referred 3 other equipment dealers in the Midwest. More importantly, she sent a personal letter to Cornerstone's CEO praising the work. When Victoria reviewed my hours, the reaction was predictable. I'd logged 64 hours against a 24-hour allocation. She called it chronic time management failure and documented it in my performance file without mentioning the revenue increase, the referrals, or the client letter that was sitting on the CEO's desk. Over the following months, the pattern kept repeating. I'd take on projects, exceed Victoria's arbitrary hour allocations, and deliver results that transformed client relationships and generated significant revenue. Client retention in my portfolio hit 94%. Average revenue per account more than doubled. Our CEO, Martin Hale, started mentioning these numbers in board presentations without knowing or maybe without caring about the internal conflict behind them. That's what made Victoria dangerous. She wasn't stupid. She recognized the results were making the company look good, which made her look good by extension. But she also understood that my approach was a direct repudiation of the standardized framework she'd built her career at Cornerstone around. If my methods became the standard, her entire management philosophy and her value to the company became irrelevant. So, instead of adapting, she decided to eliminate the evidence. In early November, Victoria announced a department-wide methodology review. She asked me to compile a comprehensive analysis of every project I'd worked on, client assessments, field reports, solution designs, implementation results, financial impact documentation. She framed it as a best practices audit that would help the whole team learn from successful engagements. I spent 3 weeks putting together what I considered the most thorough consulting portfolio I'd ever assembled. 86 pages, documenting every client engagement, every field analysis, every customized solution, and most importantly, every dollar of additional revenue and client retention improvement those efforts had generated. It was, frankly, an airtight business case for hands-on technical consulting. But I wasn't naive anymore. I saved a complete copy of everything to a personal encrypted drive the night before the presentation. Call it instinct. Call it 7 years of learning that you always keep a backup when somebody's looking at your work a little too closely. The department meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early December. Victoria had reserved the large conference room, the one with the projection system, and the long table that seated 30. When I walked in and saw all 28 members of our consulting team already seated, plus Martin Hale sitting quietly in the back corner, I knew something was off. Victoria had me connect my files to the main display. She started by walking through the first few pages of my portfolio, narrating the project summaries with what sounded like professional detachment. Then her tone shifted. "What we're looking at," she announced to the room, "is a comprehensive example of methodology drift." She clicked to a slide showing my billable hours versus allocated hours, a chart she'd clearly designed to make the overages look as dramatic as possible. Every project in this portfolio exceeded its time allocation by an average of 240%. This represents a fundamental failure to operate within our established consulting framework. I sat there watching her reframe 14 months of the best client results in company history as a cautionary tale about inefficiency. She went project by project, Brannigan Mining, Mercer Agricultural, every engagement, stripping away the revenue gains, the client retention improvements, the referrals, and focusing exclusively on hours spent versus hours allocated. Then she opened my complete portfolio file on the shared screen. Every analysis, every field report, every customized solution I'd developed. She selected all of it. "This methodology is unsustainable and unscalable," she said. "Effective immediately, all consulting engagements will follow our standardized service delivery framework. No exceptions. No unauthorized site visits. No projects exceeding allocated hours without written pre-approval." And she dragged everything into the trash. Right there, in front of 28 people, 86 pages of documented success, deleted with a single gesture while the room watched in stunned silence. The person sitting 3 seats to my left, a junior consultant named Ryan Torres, who I'd been mentoring for months, had his phone under the table. I didn't know it at the time, but he was texting someone, a very specific someone. Victoria turned from the screen with a look of satisfaction that I will never forget. She fully expected me to sit there and take it, to accept the humiliation, rebuild my work according to her templates, and fall in line. What she didn't know was 3 things. First, I had a complete backup of every file she'd just deleted. Second, a consulting firm called Trident Industrial Group had been quietly recruiting me for months. I'd been politely declining because I felt loyal to my clients at Cornerstone. And third, Ryan Torres had just texted his former college roommate, who happened to be the operations director at Trident. The words, "She just did it. He's free. Call him now." My phone buzzed in my pocket about 90 seconds later. I looked at the screen. Trident Industrial Group. I stood up. Victoria paused mid-sentence. She'd been explaining some new standardized assessment template and looked at me with irritation. "I need to take this call," I said. "We're in the middle of a department meeting. Derek. This can wait." "No," I said. "It really can't." I stepped into the hallway and answered. The voice on the other end belonged to Nathan Cross, Trident's managing partner. "Derek," Nathan said, "I understand the timing might seem unusual, but we've been wanting to have this conversation for a while. We're prepared to offer you $310,000 annually, full benefits, equity participation, and complete autonomy over technical consulting methodology. We want you to build our industrial consulting practice the way it should be built, from the ground up, in the field, solving real problems." I stood in that hallway for maybe 10 seconds, looking through the conference room glass at Victoria, who was continuing her presentation as if nothing had happened. Then I looked at the 28 people in that room, most of whom had spent the last year watching me deliver results while their director tried to stop me. I took the offer. When I walked back into the conference room, I didn't sit down. Victoria stopped talking. "I have an announcement," I said. "I'm resigning from Cornerstone Fleet Services, effective immediately. I've accepted a position as Senior Partner and Director of Technical Consulting at Trident Industrial Group." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Victoria's expression went through about 4 stages in 2 seconds: confusion, disbelief, calculation, and then something that looked a lot like fear. "You can't resign without 2 weeks' notice," she said. "There are contractual obligations, client transition protocols." "Actually," I replied, "my employment agreement includes a clause allowing immediate departure in cases where work product is deliberately destroyed by management. You just did that in front of 28 witnesses and the CEO." I looked at Martin Hale, who had been sitting in the back corner watching everything unfold. His face was unreadable, but he didn't contradict me. Victoria tried to recover. "This is unprofessional. You're abandoning your clients." "No," I said. "I spent 14 months building relationships with clients who trust me because I solved their real problems. Those relationships exist in their facilities, in their operations, in their bottom lines. You deleted files. Victoria, you didn't delete results. And you definitely didn't delete their phone numbers." I gathered my things and walked out. Ryan Torres caught my eye as I passed his chair. He gave me a nod so subtle nobody else would have noticed. That kid had just changed the trajectory of my career with a text message, and I owed him more than he probably realized. Within 48 hours, I was set up at Trident's office. It was smaller than Cornerstone's, but the energy was different. These were people who believed that industrial consulting meant getting your boots dirty and solving problems that mattered. I didn't contact a single Cornerstone client. I didn't have to. By Thursday of my first week, Frank Brannigan called me directly. "Derek," he said, "I heard you moved. Tell me about Trident. Can they support the maintenance program you built for us, or do I need to find someone else?" That conversation lasted an hour. By the end of it, Frank was scheduling a meeting to discuss transitioning his account. Colleen Mercer called Friday afternoon. She'd heard through the agricultural equipment dealer network that community is smaller and more connected than people realize. She wanted to know if Trident could continue supporting her parts optimization system and maybe expand it to 2 more locations she was opening. By the end of my second week at Trident, I'd received calls from 8 former Cornerstone clients. Not because I'd reached out, but because when you spend 14 months genuinely solving someone's operational problems, they remember who did the work. The consultant's name on the solutions, not the company logo on the invoice. Meanwhile, back at Cornerstone, Victoria was discovering exactly what she'd thrown away. The first sign was Frank Brannigan's non-renewal notice, then Colleen Mercer's, then 3 more in the same week. Through contacts who still worked there, I heard that Victoria spent 2 frantic weeks trying to retain accounts by offering discounted rates and promising enhanced service delivery. But the clients weren't interested in discounts. They wanted someone who understood their operations, and the person who did that no longer worked there. The part that gave me the most satisfaction came about 6 weeks after I left. Martin Hale called an emergency board meeting to address the client losses. Through a friend who attended, I learned that Victoria tried to blame the departures on market conditions and client poaching. Martin asked her to explain why the clients who left were specifically the ones I'd managed. She couldn't answer. He then asked her to explain why she had deleted the documentation that proved our most successful consulting methodology in front of the entire department. She tried to argue that the methodology was unsustainable. Martin's response, as it was relayed to me, was devastating in its simplicity. He said, "Victoria, you deleted $1.4 million in annual revenue because it didn't fit your spreadsheet. Then you lost the person who generated it. Help me understand what part of that was sustainable." She was terminated the following week. Not quietly reassigned, not allowed to resign gracefully, terminated. Her access was revoked the same afternoon, and she was escorted out of the building carrying a cardboard box past the same conference room where she deleted my files 2 months earlier. I heard she applied to 3 other consulting firms in the region. All 3 declined after checking references with Cornerstone. Turns out, publicly destroying a colleague's work and driving away $1.4 million in annual revenue doesn't look great on your professional record. Today, Trident Industrial Group has grown 180% in the past year. I'm a senior partner with Equity, running a technical consulting practice that does exactly what I always believed in: going to client sites, understanding their real operations, and building solutions that live in their facilities, not just in our filing systems. Frank Brannigan's fleet is running at 87% uptime now. Colleen Mercer just opened her 6th dealership location. Every single client who followed me from Cornerstone has expanded their contract at least once. Ryan Torres, the junior consultant who sent that text, he joined Trident 4 months after I did. He's one of our best field consultants now, and I make sure he gets every opportunity to develop the kind of hands-on expertise that no MBA program can teach. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry about what Victoria did. Honestly, I'm grateful. She forced me out of a situation where loyalty was keeping me from reaching my potential. She deleted files that I'd already backed up and destroyed a career that had already outgrown the container she was trying to force it into. Here's what I tell the younger engineers and consultants who work with me now. Your expertise lives in what you build for people, not in what's stored on a company server. When you walk through someone's facility and figure out why their equipment keeps breaking down, or why their parts system can't keep up with demand, that knowledge becomes part of who you are. Nobody can drag that into a trash icon. And when someone tries to erase the evidence of your value, pay attention, because they're not really destroying your work. They're showing you and everyone watching exactly who they are. The only question is whether you're brave enough to walk through the door they just opened for you. Victoria thought she was teaching me a lesson about following her rules. What she actually taught me was that some people would rather destroy proof of success than admit their framework was wrong. And the best response isn't anger or revenge. It's building something better somewhere else, and letting the results speak for themselves month after month, client after client, until the silence from your old office says everything that needs to be said.